I'm J.R. Church. Welcome to today's Prophecy in the News. The last couple of days we've been talking to you about a book written by a rabbi, Menachem Cohen. It's called Prophecies for the Era of Muslim Terror. And one of the major features of this book shows how God's existence is proven in the Scriptures by his predicting that the land would be desolate. When the Jews were scattered to the slave markets of the world, the land would become so desolate that even the Gentiles could not occupy the land. And here's the way it's put in Leviticus chapter 26, beginning in verse 32. And I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies which dwell therein, see, an enemy is going to occupy the land after the Jews are taken, shall be astonished at it. Why would the Gentiles be astonished at the land after they got rid of the occupants and they themselves occupy the houses and the businesses and the fields and they're planting crops, etc.? He says, I will scatter you, the Jews, among the Gentiles, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate and your cities waste. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths as long as it lieth desolate, and ye be in your enemy's land. Then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbaths. As long as it lieth desolate, it shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbaths wherein you dwelt upon it. Now listen, friend. If God says that the land is going to lie desolate, that means that the occupying Gentiles will not be able to live there either. That the land will not be productive for them. Otherwise, the land would not be lying desolate and enjoy its Sabbaths. So God saw to it that the heavens became brass, metaphorically, and the land became iron, metaphorically, and that all the rain that came was in the form of dust. That's what God says in Deuteronomy 28, verses 23 through 25. The land is going to be desolate, so barren and so desolate. The Gentiles cannot occupy the land. And as I told you on the last program, the Turks sent 300,000 people there in the mid-16th century to occupy the land and to plant crops and to open businesses and to settle communities. And the locusts came and devoured their crops, and the earthquakes came and tore down the buildings that they built. And eventually they had to go back home. Had those Turks been able to stay in the land for 350 years, then in 1947 there would have been millions of Turks there. How then could the Jews possibly have been restored to their land if the land was totally occupied by somebody else? It's kind of like the Indians here in the States saying, we used to occupy Manhattan Island, we want it back. Who's going to give it back to them? That's the situation in Israel, or the Holy Land, if there had been an occupying Gentile community there. The UN, the League of Nations, nobody would have said, okay, all you Turks, sorry, you have to leave. I know you were born here. I know you have families here. You have land and businesses and crops, etc., but hey, and homes. You just have to lock the door, leave, go back to a land you've never lived in before, called Turkey, and live there because your forefathers or your ancient ancestors, they came and settled this land, and that's the reason why you're here. But you got to leave because the Jews are coming home. It didn't happen. Why? Because the land was so desolate that the Turks couldn't stay, the Mongols couldn't stay, the Crusaders couldn't stay, the Muslims couldn't stay. Nobody could stay in that land. But you know, around the turn of the century, the 20th century, the land began to grow again. The rains returned. Listen to Psalm 19 and verse 8. This is a part of the prophecies for the era of Muslim terror by Menachem Cohen. And I want to take you over to this beautiful Psalm 19. You remember Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day utter his speech. Night unto night showeth knowledge. Well, listen to verse 8. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandments of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. Now that's the King James translation. But what it says in the Hebrew context is that the prophecies of the Torah prove the existence of God. They prove that God is true and that God is real. And when God says to the Jews, I'm going to scatter you from your nation, and he said, but I won't forsake you, I'll go with you, it's true. He did scatter them, but the Jews maintained their identity for 1,800 plus years, maintained their identity. We're not assimilated among the nations. And we're able to plan generation after generation after generation to go back home. And every year at Passover, they would say at around the last thing around the Passover table, next year in Jerusalem. And every Jewish wedding, they would crush a glass to symbolize the destruction of the Jewish temple. Looking forward to that day when they would rebuild their temple and they would be back in their land. And so, Menachem Cohen here has some really interesting information. He says, if you think this information is fascinating, well, you ain't seen nothing yet. It says, were it not for these acts of nature in the 16th century, can you imagine what Israel would have looked like 400 years later in 1947? One should note that if the Turks had not run away from the Holy Land in the mid-16th century, there would be millions of Turks living in the land in 1947. Under these conditions, could the returning Jews in 1947 have been allowed to supplant a resident population that would have numbered in the millions by that time? Obviously not. So God kept the Turks out. He kept the Muslims out. He kept everybody out so that the land would be desolate when the Jews returned. He says, I'll make the land desolate. And the Talmud in a folio called Sifra B. Chukotia, chapter 6, verse 5, says, the rampant desolation is ultimately for your benefit. As is stated, your enemies who dwell upon it will be totally unproductive. The King James Version says astonished. This means that even your enemies who arrive afterwards will find no comfort there, because of this forbidding condition will prevent even your enemies from comfortably living and settling there. And so, he continues to write about these fascinating events that caused the land to be kept desolate for the benefit of the Jewish people who wanted to return. So he says, as we have seen and shall continue to see, our understanding of Bible prophecy enhanced greatly with secular knowledge, with a knowledge of history and science, astronomy, archaeology, mathematics, and all other disciplines. Thus, in a very direct and clear manner, the Torah seems actually to bid us to study history and current events. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 7, one must ponder history and comprehend current events and ask parents and elders to share their knowledge and insights in this regard. And he writes, additionally, we have enhanced our understanding of Torah with secular knowledge, a fact that will become ever so obviously as we proceed. Indeed, the evidence is overwhelming, he writes. We noted that the prophecy that the land will be desolate so that all people will not be able to survive there. We noted the condition of rampant desolation would ultimately benefit the returning Jews because the forbidding conditions will prevent others from settling there. After reviewing this information, an intellectually honest person must conclude that, number one, the world definitely has a creator. Number two, the creator has provided us with the Torah and with prophecies. Number three, the creator intervenes. Number four, the creator controls history. He controls weather, agriculture, and the creator controls everything, he writes. And so, we have this incredible prophecy that the land would become desolate. And we have history proving it. That for 1,800 years, from the time the Romans destroyed the temple in AD 70 and began to scatter the Jews to the slave markets of the world, the land became unproductive. So unproductive that the Gentiles who lived there had to leave as well. Wow. Well, I hope you'll get this book and read all about it. It's called Prophecies for the Era of Muslim Terror. It's about 225 pages. It's $24.95 plus shipping and handling. It's a hardbound book, hardcover. You'll love it. I'm confident of it. So order it from us, $24.95 plus shipping and handling. Call the phone number at the bottom of your screen. That's 1-800-475-1111. Let us send it out to you right away. I'm J.R. Church. We'll see you again tomorrow with our analysis of the news.